Benjamin, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for sure. It's, again, the rematch of the 2021 World Chess Championship, so this one might also be a little bit personal for both of the players. Also, again, these players are from the same generation. They're both born in 1990. As we speak, by the way, we're off. And again, like they've played in World Youth Under 12 Championships.
And they go way, way back. And Jan actually had the lead in their head-to-head history until that World Championship match when it was a one-sided victory for Magnus. We have a Petrov, and for this match, I'm wondering, is Jan going to try to be more solid, or is he going to bring his chaotic brand of chess, which has scored him some fine victories in his career, but also can backfire if you play a little too loosey-goosey?
Yeah, I think he's going to try to stick to a style, try to play aggressively, especially with the white piece against Magnus. He wasn't quite able to do so in the match, but that is also very impressive from Magnus's part, that he doesn't let Jan into his A-game, so to speak, and he turned the game into more grindy, slow positions. But let's see what we have here, Robert. It started out as a Petrov, but it turned into a bit of a French exchange. Pretty boring so far, but we know how Magnus can work his magic here.
We see Magnus, he's eating his lunch, so he's just taking it step by step, but I agree with you. The reason why we call this position a bit boring, so to speak, is there's no pawn tension. Only one pawn has been traded per side. We haven't seen anything of note in a symmetrical structure, so let's see how this one develops. But I wonder, Benjamin, do you think it's match strategy for Magnus, not just to get his meal in at the start, but to sort of see what Jan wants in the opening stages?
Yeah, and I think it definitely makes sense to see what Jan wants. Jan has been sticking to his guns. He played the Petrov defense. He played that in their World Championship match as well. I'm not too impressed so far with Magnus's opening choice. I think Jan is doing fairly well. I mean, Magnus has these slightly more active pieces. However, this knight on c3 can sometimes be slightly misplaced as it's currently restricted by the pawn on c6. Queen e2, I like the move by Magnus as h6 would invite a sacrifice over here. But knight f8, a nice move by Jan, and look at the clock, Robert. Jan does this very well. He's already up on time, and perhaps Magnus might be struggling a little bit with this because normally he's the one putting pressure, and Jan often is the one putting pressure on him.
And look at this position. The rook gets to the open file. Black can develop that light square bishop to maybe e6, but it does feel a little bit like Black's pieces are fighting for the same squares. Like both the knight and the bishop want to go to e6. That's a good square for them both. So White's, so far, the pieces feel a little bit more fluid. There's a more natural set of squares for them. But ultimately, yeah, I'm not super impressed with what Magnus has done. And yet, he wins games just like this, that seem unwinnable, that seem like nothing. He'll probably knight e5 here, and then it starts to seem like he's going to go for a bit of an initiative.
Yeah, knight e5 seems like a nice move, putting the knight in the middle. I wonder if Jan can take on d4, but that does look fairly risky, and there we see the move knight e5. Now perhaps after knight takes d4, maybe Magnus can take on f6. You're going to have to recapture the g-pawn, and at the very least there's something like queen h6. You can also take on d7 and take on h7. So I suppose staying on d4 is too risky for Jan, and maybe he has to play something more solid like bishop to e7, because for them... Oh, and wow, there we go, Robert.
But we were saying at the start of the show, you can't afford blunders or sort of crazy chess if it's not objectively strong against Magnus Carlsen. That earned a question mark. And I think it's simple. Bishop takes knight on f6. As you mentioned, you have to take with the pawn on f6. And then even just take on d7. Black's pawn structure is going to be worse. I love what Magnus has been able to achieve from what looked like a nothing opening.
Yeah, so let's see what Magnus has to do here. I think bishop takes f6 is certainly the start. If you take it to queen, you leave the bishop on d7 hanging. So perhaps you're going to have to recapture with the pawn. Now, you can take on d7, take on h7 afterwards, and then take on d4. And perhaps that is the position that Jan is going for. And he might feel like after something like queen f5, he's not doing too bad. But I do wonder if Magnus can take and go queen h6. Because how exactly do you stop the threat of checkmate?
Maybe Black would have to play a move like bishop f or knight f5 or something like that, but yeah, you're hanging on barely at that stage. So I think Magnus he's working out what we're talking about right here. You need to be precise, you need to come up with the correct move order, because if you get a little bit lazy, say with like knight takes d7 now, queen takes d7, maybe at some point Black will have a different move order that helps his chances.
Yeah, no, for sure. So yeah, it looks extremely risky. Magnus investing some time, but I'm sure he's going to go down this line with bishop takes f6. Pawn takes. He takes on h7. Wow, Robert. I guess in case it takes, he wants to take an f7 and fork the queen and the bishop.
Oh, that's actually pretty nice. I wasn't even looking in that direction. And in that situation, the queen and bishop are forked, and the knight on d4 is still loose. So maybe black has to throw in like a knight f3 check at some point just to shatter white's pawn structure. But this does look like a situation where Magnus has the upper hand. Jan, he didn't expect that. He reacted to knight takes f7 like, oh, didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, no, that's a little bit sloppy by Jan. I think knight takes d4 was a little bit rushed. So let's see what he's going to do here. Knight f3 is certainly a possibility if white has to take, and then perhaps queen c7. Magnus has to be doing well there. I mean, maybe it feels like he's more likely to take advantage of the open g-file. Jan can, of course, also move the queen right away, but after queen takes d4, white is an extra pawn, and their king is safer.
This looks really bad for black, and you could take on f6 at some moment for white if you want to shatter the king side even more, because I don't think black can ever afford to take that bishop with the queen swooping in to h6. So Benjamin, this is looking very problematic for Jan, and it went from a completely even-looking position, and then Magnus makes one forward jump with his knight earlier in the game, and Jan did not react in the best way.
Yeah, we've been talking about this before the match. Jan, again, like if he wants to give himself a good chance, he has to try to avoid losing games like this. He has to try to hang in there. Usually he plays faster than Magnus, so perhaps he can get Magnus into time pressure. But if he blunders early on, then you're just going to gift a lot of points to Magnus, and that's going to make it very tough.
And when have we ever heard of Magnus relinquishing a lead? The matches that he's lost that I can think of, including last year's Speed Chess Championship to Hikaru, the Bullet Chess Championship match against both Alireza and Hikaru, he was losing out of the gates, and then he was trying to come back. So for Magnus, winning game one would be huge, and for Jan, if anyone can win a game on demand, I do trust Jan. He is so creative, but it's just not what you want in a match against Magnus Carlsen.
No, for sure, because Magnus, he can also be extremely solid and almost impossible to beat if he wants to. And yeah, like I said, I think you have the best chance against Magnus if you win early on, hang on to that lead. That might also make him a little bit nervous. Maybe he's going to rush a little bit to try to come back. And finally, we see Jan settling on the move queen to c7. So now let's see what Magnus is going to do. I guess he should take on d4, just take the knight. In case of knight takes d6, perhaps then Jan can throw in that move knight f3 check and force you to double your pawns. Knight f3 check, I think, was not really a possibility before, because white also has this option to go bishop takes f6 combined with queen h6. So I think right now, Magnus is either going to take this knight or take the knight on d4.
It's a good call. And the problem for Magnus is he can only take one piece at a time. And if you take the knight on f6, black for sure will not take back with the g-pawn. I think that knight on d4 will slide back to f5, and you're just trying to keep your king as safe as possible. So maybe white will remain up a pawn, but it's pawns on separate sides of the board. Black has an extra pawn on the d-file, white has two extra pawns on the king side, and that creates a dynamic imbalance that should help in black's chances to hold if white is not able to crash through against that black king.
Yeah, we see Magnus falling quite far behind on the clock here. He's dropping below a minute. I think he's still in very good shape here. He's got a dominant position, but you got to be careful, especially against Jan, who is so extremely who is so extremely tricky when you're in time pressure. Because 96, wait, but Robert, that was the mistake we were talking about. I think now Jan is doing quite fine, actually.
I'm not sure why Magnus went for this, because look at these pawns on the king side. Now you have the split f pawns and a loose h pawn that's under attack. He goes in with his queen, but suddenly look at the eval bar saying black is actually the side for choice. Knight e4, forcing those queens off. And how could black be worse in this endgame? Double exclaimed, deserved from Jan, because that way his king is safe. Benjamin, this is starting to turn around.
Yeah, great move by Jan. He's offering the trade of queens. I don't think there's a good way for Magnus to get out of it, and he does go for the queen trade. The pawn on h3 is hanging now. These pawns are weak. Bishop f5 is an option, or knight c4. Attacking this pawn, and also, Robert, after knight c4, you turn to go knight d2. And look at the clock. Magnus down to 18 seconds.
And that's a very good response of king to g2, because the knight could take b2, but the rook would have slid to b1 to win the b7 pawn and get some activity. So very good find from Magnus. But I'm looking at the clock. He's down to 10 seconds. Benjamin, he's got to move. Yeah,
bishop f5, great move by Jan, not taking the pawn, knight at e2. All right, so Jan can just take this pawn over here now and get a pretty significant advantage. I guess Magnus is playing good knight e4. I don't know, he's in real trouble here, Robert. Perhaps Jan can start off hot in this match.
It didn't look like that at first, but if he grabs these queenside pawns, I would take on c2, as you said. Now black has this unopposed d-pawn passer. White's pawns, they're gross. Double F and isolated H, they can't create a pass pawn very easily. This looks like Jan Nepomniachtchi's game. He needs to pressure Magnus on the clock.
Yeah, and that's what he's doing. He takes on c2, goes bishop d3, and now he can take another pawn. He doesn't do so. Now Magnus goes b3. The position might be manageable here because where do you actually go with the knight?
This was a mistake from Jan. He should have pawn. Instead, he's backtracking. But look at Magnus pushing for an a5, followed by a6 was a threat, and that's why Black played a5. But that's a long-term weakness. If that bishop slides to c7 at the right moment, a5 could be a target.
But look at the clock. Magnus down to 4 seconds. Jan has to be doing well here. But let's see if he can create some problems for Magnus. I think Magnus, objectively, he should be doing fine. Like, it's opposite color bishops. These pawns are blocked over here on the queen side. It's difficult to make use of them. But the clock...
He's barely getting his moves off. I mean, he's 2.9 seconds after that move. You gain 1 second of increment, everybody. I think bishop f4 was a good choice. That bishop can go to e3 or to g5. It will block the black rooks. And now Magnus might play b4 himself and just start trading off pawns.
Yeah, so let's see how Jan is going to try to do this. Rook g6 check, I guess, will be met with bishop to g5. He goes rook to c8. Perhaps aiming to set his pawns in motion, but for now you can't, as it will hang the pawn on d5. And with the move bishop to g5, Magnus is actually creating that threat. Oh,
rook takes
he
c5.
edged the pawn.
Yes, because it wasn't available a move ago, because rook g6 would have been check. There's no check against the white king. The rook on c8 is loose. Now Magnus, he can go from a position where he was worse to potentially one where he could try to outplay Jan, although with bishops of opposite color, this realistically should just be a simple draw.
But h5 was a great move there. h5 again, and set up, because you cannot take. Okay, now...
Yeah, he's setting up h5. Now h5 is a big threat.
Right, so king e8 therefore by Jan. Okay, so now we have h5, a couple moves to let Jan just takes it. Okay, king g3. This game, probably a draw, but it can still go either way with both players getting a long time.
And here comes the f pawn. I said they weren't good, but pawn f...
Oh, rook g4!
Rook g4 takes g5!
Wow, what a blunder. And rook takes the 5 is just a game, because you can... Wow.